April 21st, 1945. The eastern approaches to Berlin. A German tank officer stands in the cupola of his disabled Panther, smoke still rising from the engine deck. The air smells of burning oil and spring earth. He raises his field glasses. What he sees makes him lower them slowly. Shermans, hundreds of them. They stretch across the horizon in staggered columns, rolling forward through the farmland like a steel tide. Engines rumbling, tracks clattering, dust rising in pale clouds beneath the late afternoon sun. Some are scorched black from previous engagements. Others are pristine, freshly arrived from depots that never seem to run dry. They are not graceful. They are not fearsome in design. But they do not stop. Behind him, Berlin burns. Ahead, the Americans advance. And in this moment, the officer remembers the jokes, the dismissals. The technical superiority his commanders promised would be enough. He remembers when they laughed at the M4 Sherman. That laughter died somewhere between Normandy and here. The laughter began years earlier. September 1939. Poland fell in 27 days. The world watched German panzers slice through defensive lines with a speed that defied the old rules of warfare. Panzer I, in two models, supplemented by Czech-built 38T, moved in coordinated swarms, supported by Stukas and mechanized infantry. The Poles fought bravely. But courage alone could not stop the blitzkrieg. France came next, May 1940, 6 weeks. The French possessed more tanks than Germany, better armored, better gunned. The Char B-1 and Samyo S-35 were formidable machines. Yet German doctrine outmatched French steel, concentrated armor thrusts, radio communication, combined arms coordination. While French tanks were parceled out in infantry support roles, German panzers struck in massed formations, punching through the Ardennes and racing to the Channel. The world's military establishments took note. Across the Atlantic, American war planners watched the newsreels with growing unease. The U.S. Army possessed exactly 0 modern medium tanks in 1940. Its armored force consisted largely of M2, light tanks machines armed with 50 caliber machine guns, suitable for colonial policing, but utterly inadequate for modern warfare. The crisis was obvious. America needed armor, quickly. Development began in earnest in late 1940. The M3 medium tank, soon nicknamed the Grant by the British and Lee by Americans, emerged as a stopgap solution. It mounted a 75mm gun in a sponson on the hull side, an awkward design dictated by the inability to mount such a weapon in a turret on short notice. The M3 was tall, riveted, and mechanically reliable. It was also obsolete before it left the factory. Engineers were already designing its replacement. The M4 medium tank came into being in 1941, months before America even entered the war. The design philosophy was quintessentially American: mechanical reliability, ease of production, crew survivability, logistical simplicity. It mounted a 75mm gun in a fully rotating turret. It used a proven radial aircraft engine or later, other power plants depending on factory availability. Its armor was sloped where possible, welded or cast depending on the hull variant. It was not a technical marvel. The Sherman, as it would be called, following the British tradition of naming American tanks after Civil War generals, was designed to be good enough to fight, good enough to build in vast numbers, good enough to ship across oceans and maintain in the field with minimal specialized tools. American factories began production in February 1942. By summer, the first M4 South were rolling off assembly lines in 11 different plants across the United States. Fisher Body, Ford, Chrysler, Pacific Car and Foundry, Baldwin Locomotive, Pressed Steel, Federal Welder. The American industrial complex, freshly awakened to total war, turned its enormous capacity toward a single goal: producing armor faster than the enemy could destroy it. The Sherman was never meant to be the best tank on the battlefield. It was meant to be everywhere. North Africa. October 1942. The M4 Sherman entered combat at the Second Battle of El Alamein. British and Commonwealth forces, reinforced with American-built tanks, faced Rommel's Afrika Korps across the desert sands of Egypt. The Shermans proved immediately superior to the German Panzer IIs that made up the bulk of the Afrika Korps armor. The 75 mm gun could penetrate their frontal armor at combat ranges. The Shermans' reliability in desert conditions exceeded expectations. The Germans adapted quickly. Within months, Panzer IVs began appearing with upgraded long-barreled 75 mm KWK-40 guns and additional frontal armor. The technical race was on. More significantly, Tiger I heavy tanks arrived in Tunisia in late 1942, massive 56-ton beasts mounting the feared 88 mm gun, protected by armor up to 100 mm thick. The first encounters were brutal lessons. A Tiger could destroy a Sherman at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. A Sherman's 75 mm gun struggled to penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor even at point-blank range. The mathematical reality was stark. In a one-on-one engagement on open ground, the Tiger won. German tank crews began to speak of the Sherman with casual dismissal. It was boxy. The silhouette stood tall over 9 feet high, making it easy to spot and target. The armor was adequate against older German guns, but increasingly vulnerable as German anti-tank weapons evolved. The 75 mm gun, excellent against fortifications and infantry, lacked penetrating power against the new generation of German heavy armor. Worst of all, it burned. The early M4 South ran on gasoline-powered radial engines. When penetrated, particularly in the engine compartment or ammunition storage, they had a tendency to catch fire rapidly. American crews began calling it the Ronson, after the cigarette lighter company whose advertising slogan promised lights every time. British crews used darker humor. Tommy Cooker, the reputation spread. German intelligence reports from 1943 and 1944 reflect a consistent assessment. The Sherman was inferior to German medium and heavy tanks in armor protection, firepower, and battlefield survivability. Tactically, it posed little threat in direct engagement. Strategically, however, the reports noted something else. There were so many of them. By mid-1943, Sherman production exceeded 2,000 tanks per month. German factories, bombing raids notwithstanding, struggled to produce 300 Panzers monthly, and that figure included all types, from light reconnaissance vehicles to heavy Tigers. The disparity was not merely numerical, it was philosophical. Germany built tanks like precision instruments, complex, powerful, increasingly sophisticated. Each Tiger required 300,000 man-hours to produce. Each Panther needed extensive specialized training for crews and maintenance personnel. Replacement parts were often manufactured to specific tolerances, limiting interchangeability. America built tanks like trucks. Standardized components, interchangeable parts across variants, simplified maintenance procedures. The Sherman could be field repaired with basic tools. Its tracks could be replaced by a trained crew in under 2 hours. Engines could be swapped out entirely rather than repaired. A damaged power plant exchanged for a fresh one and sent to rear area depots for rebuilding. The Germans saw weakness. The Americans saw a system. And as 1943 turned toward 1944, that system began to accelerate beyond anything the Wehrmacht had encountered. The jokes continued. The technical superiority remained real. But in the factories of Detroit, Gary, and Grand Blanc, the M4 Sherman rolled off production lines in numbers that would soon rewrite the mathematics of armored warfare. The laughter would not last much longer. June 6, 1944, Normandy. The Shermans came ashore at Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. Duplex drive variants fitted with flotation screens floundered in heavy seas. Many sank before reaching the beaches. Others made it through the surf, dropped their canvas skirts, and rolled into the inferno of German defensive fire. Behind them came standard M4 South, waterproofed and laden with additional armor, wading through chest-deep water toward a coastline erupting with artillery. By nightfall on June 6th, Allied forces had landed over 2,000 armored vehicles. The breakout from the beaches proved far bloodier than the landings. Normandy's bocage country-dense hedgerows, bordering narrow lanes and small fields, turned every advance into a close-range nightmare. German defenders positioned PaK-40 anti-tank guns in concealed positions, waiting until Shermans appeared at knife-fighting distance before opening fire. Panzer IVs and Panthers used the terrain masterfully, firing from hull-down positions before withdrawing through prepared routes. The Sherman's height became a fatal liability. Climbing over a hedgerow exposed the thin belly armor to German guns. Advancing down lanes meant presenting the frontal armor to enemies who knew every firing position, every concealed approach. The losses mounted quickly. June 13th. British Shermans engaged a single Tiger I near Villers Bocage. SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann destroyed 25 Allied vehicles, in 15 minutes 14 of them tanks. The engagement became legend in German armored circles. Proof of technical superiority. Confirmation that individual excellence could overcome numerical odds. But Wittmann's Tiger was alone. The Allied armor kept coming. American tank crews learned the brutal lessons rapidly. Never engage a Panther or Tiger frontally if any alternative existed. Use mobility as Sherman's advantage. Flank whenever possible. One tank draws fire while others maneuver. 5 Shermans against 1 Panther meant acceptable odds. 1 or 2 would die, but the Panther would burn. The ratio was coldly practical. Engineers welded salvaged steel to hulls field expedient armor that added weight but saved lives. Hedgerow cutters' sharp steel tusks mounted on the bow allowed Shermans to punch through bocage without exposing their bellies. Crews requested and received better ammunition. The 75mm M4 South began receiving supplemental M1A1 76mm gun variants with improved armor penetration. It was not enough to match a Tiger. It was enough to kill more Germans than died killing Shermans. Tactics evolved beyond the tank itself. American combined arms doctrine refined through blood became devastatingly effective. Shermans advanced with infantry in close support. Artillery suppressed anti-tank positions before armor moved. Tank destroyers with heavier guns stayed in overwatch, ready to engage German armor at range. Air support, increasingly dominant as the Luftwaffe withered, struck enemy concentrations before they reached the front. The German army had technical superiority. The American army had a system that rendered technical superiority insufficient. July 1944, Operation Cobra. The breakout from Normandy began with concentrated air bombardment followed by massed armor thrusts. Entire German defensive positions simply ceased to exist under the weight of coordinated firepower. Where Panthers tried to stem the breakthrough, they faced not individual Shermans, but entire armored columns supported by artillery, infantry, and air power. The Wehrmacht fell back. August, the Falaise Pocket. German forces attempting to retreat were encircled and destroyed. Shermans, no longer bottled up in the bocage, ranged across open country where their mechanical reliability and operational range proved decisive. German armor, increasingly short of fuel and spare parts, broke down or ran dry. Shermans kept moving. Paris fell, then Belgium. By September, Allied armor reached the German border. The Third Reich pulled back its battered panzer divisions and prepared for a counteroffensive that would demonstrate, once and for all, that German armor could still determine the outcome of battles. They would get their chance in the winter forests of the Ardennes. December 16, 1944. The Ardennes Forest. German armor struck through morning fog in a massive surprise offensive. 3 entire armies, 28 divisions punched through thinly held American lines. Tiger Eye is the new King Tiger, heaviest tank of the war-led Panzer spearheads. Panthers followed in company strength. The objective was Antwerp. The reality was desperation, disguised as aggression. The initial days belonged to Germany. Shermans of the Green American 106th Infantry Division were overrun or encircled. At Malmedy, German columns bypassed American positions too rapidly for coherent defense. At Bastogne, the 101st Airborne found itself surrounded, with only a handful of M4 South and tank destroyers for armored support. But the weather cleared on December 23rd. Allied air power returned with devastating effect. And behind the surrounded positions, something unprecedented began to happen. Entire armored divisions, hundreds of Shermans, reversed course from planned offensives and redeployed north. Patton's Third Army pivoted 90 degrees in under 72 hours. A logistical feat possible only because of standardized equipment, reliable vehicles, and overwhelming supply superiority. The German spearheads ran out of fuel before they ran out of will. Shermans from the 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions hit the flanks of German penetrations. At St. Vith, at Bastogne, in a dozen unnamed villages, American armor engaged in close-quarters winter fighting that negated German range advantages. In forests and towns, ambush became mutual. The Tiger's 88 millimeters meant little when a Sherman appeared around a building corner at 30 yards. And when Tigers were destroyed or abandoned for lack of fuel, there were no replacements. When Shermans burned, new ones arrived within days. By January 1945, the bulge had been reduced, then eliminated. German armor losses exceeded 600 tanks and assault guns, irreplaceable machines, crewed by irreplaceable veterans. American losses were higher in raw numbers, but American factories had already built the replacements before the battle even began. The German army never launched another offensive in the West. March 7, 1945. Remagen. American forces seized an intact bridge across the Rhine. Shermans poured across before German demolition charges could drop the span. Engineers threw additional bridges across the river within days. By mid-March, entire armored divisions were driving into the industrial heart of Germany. The killing ground had reversed. Now it was German defenders in unfamiliar terrain, falling back through their own cities, short of ammunition and fuel. Now it was Shermans appearing in overwhelming numbers, supported by artillery that never seemed to run low on shells, advancing under air cover, so complete that Luftwaffe appearances became newsworthy events. April 1945. The Ruhr Pocket encircled. Model's Army Group B, over 300,000 men trapped and systematically destroyed. Shermans ranged through the Ruhr industrial region, across the same ground where the tank's steel had likely been forged in peacetime foundries. The advance accelerated. Some German units fought with fanatical determination. Others surrendered to the first Allied patrol that appeared. In the chaos of collapse, Sherman columns raced eastward, not toward resistance, but toward link-up with Soviet forces, driving from the opposite direction. April 11th. The Elbe River. American and Soviet forces met. Between the Normandy beaches in central Germany, the Western Allies had landed, supplied, and sustained more than 20,000 M4 Shermans in the European theater alone. Thousands more fought in Italy. In the Pacific, Marine and Army Shermans clawed across island after island. The Germans had been right about the technical specifications. They had been catastrophically wrong about what would matter. Berlin did not see 49,000 Shermans roll through its ruins. But the German officers who surrendered in May 1945 understood what that number meant. Total M4 Sherman production, all variants, all theaters, 49,234 tanks. The exact figure varied slightly depending on how prototype and specialized variants were counted, but the magnitude remained unchanged. 49,000. Germany produced approximately 6,000 Panthers between 1943 and 1945. Roughly 1,350 Tigers of both types. Perhaps 8,500 Panzer IVs in the war's final years. Even including every obsolete Panzer III, captured check tank, and assault gun variant. Total German armored vehicle production from 1939 to 1945 reached approximately 31,000 vehicles. The United States built 49,000 Shermans, and that figure didn't include the thousands of M3 Stuarts, M10 and M36 tank destroyers, or specialized armored vehicles. American production reached its peak in 1943, 21,000 M4 South in a single year. The disparity wasn't mere statistics. It was the physical manifestation of industrial warfare. When the U.S. 2nd Armored Division lost 30 tanks in a single engagement, replacement vehicles arrived within a week. Fresh crews, trained at bases in the United States, sailed across the Atlantic in converted ocean liners. Spare parts existed in such quantities that entire engines were treated as disposable, field-replaceable units rather than precision machinery to be carefully repaired. When Kampfrupp-Piper lost 25 Panthers in the Ardennes, there were no replacements. German tank crews in early 1945 spoke of Materialschlacht, the battle of materials. Not a battle they could win through courage or skill, but an equation already solved by factories they would never see, in a country their air force could no longer reach. A Tiger could kill 5 Shermans before dying. Sometimes it did, but there was always a 6th Sherman. Soviet forces reached Berlin first, from the east. Their T-34s produced in even greater numbers than the Sherman ground through the city's defenses in brutal urban combat. American and British forces halted at the Elbe, having driven through western Germany in a mechanized advance that covered more ground in 3 months than the entire Western Front had moved in 4 years during the First World War. The Sherman made that advance possible, not because it was superior in combat, because it was present in overwhelming, inexhaustible quantities. German after-action reports from late-war engagements tell a consistent story. Individual German tanks often won individual engagements. German crew training remained excellent. German engineering remained sophisticated. None of it mattered at the operational level, because operational success required tanks to be present, fueled, ammunitioned, and numerous enough to be everywhere simultaneously. Germany could not build that army. America already had. After the surrender, German tank commanders were interviewed by Allied intelligence officers. General Heinz Guderian, architect of Panzer doctrine, acknowledged in interrogation that technical superiority had proven irrelevant against material abundance. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring noted that his forces in Italy faced not a better tank, but a logistical system that never broke down. Otto Carius, Tiger ace with over 150 kills, wrote years later that the Tiger was the finest tank of the war, and that this distinction meant nothing when outnumbered 10-1. The German assessment crystallized around a single reality. They had optimized for the wrong variable. German tanks were designed to win battles. American tanks were designed to win wars. A Panther required 55,000 liters of fuel to move 1,000 kilometers. A Sherman needed 1,800. When Allied forces cut German fuel supplies through strategic bombing and the loss of Romanian oil fields, German armor became immobile fortifications. Shermans kept rolling because the fuel supply chain never broke. German tank crews required months of specialized training. Each vehicle's complexity demanded skilled operators. By 1945, Replacement crews arrived at the front with weeks of instruction, thrown into sophisticated machines they barely understood. American tank training was shorter but standardized. The Sherman's relative simplicity meant a crew could achieve basic competence rapidly and advanced. Proficiency through experience, they survived long enough to gain because knocked out Shermans were recovered, repaired, and returned to service. The Sherman wasn't designed to be undestroyable. It was designed to be recoverable. American armored doctrine included dedicated recovery vehicles M32, tank recovery vehicles based on the Sherman chassis itself capable of towing damaged tanks off the battlefield. Repair depots operated just behind the lines. A Sherman penetrated through the turret might return to combat within 72 hours with a replacement turret, fresh crew, and new ammunition load. A destroyed Tiger was scavenged for parts if possible, abandoned if not. The Sherman's legacy was not written in technical specifications. It was written in presence, in the ability to be at Normandy, and the Bulge, and the Rhine, and the Elbe, in North Africa, and Sicily, and Italy, at Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, and the Philippines. The same basic chassis, the same logistical system, the same industrial philosophy, deployed across 3 continents simultaneously. Germany built 1,347 Tiger tanks in 3 years. America built more Shermans than that every single month from mid-1943 until the war's end. Historians have debated for decades whether the Sherman was adequate, inferior, or underrated. The question misses the essential point. The Sherman was sufficient, and sufficiency, mass-produced and globally deployed, proved more devastating than excellence rationed and locally concentrated. The Germans laughed at the clumsy M4. Then 49,000 of them ended the laughter forever. There is a photograph from May 1945. A single Sherman sits in a German town square, engine silent, crew dismounted. Around it, the rubble of the Third Reich. Behind it, the industrial capacity of American democracy. The Sherman was never the best tank of World War II by the metrics tank enthusiasts debate. It was outgunned by the Panther, out-armored by the Tiger, arguably outdesigned by the Soviet T-34 in certain respects. But it won. It won because war is not a duel. It is not a technical specification competition. It is a test of nations, their capacity to produce, to sustain, to replace losses faster than the enemy can inflict them. Germany built masterpieces. America built a system. The Sherman embodied a particularly American approach to warfare, pragmatic, industrial, logistically focused. It was designed not by lone geniuses seeking perfection, but by committees balancing competing requirements: cost, production speed, transportability, crew survivability, mechanical reliability. The result was imperfect by every individual measure, yet superior in the only measure that ultimately mattered: operational effectiveness over time and distance. 49,000 Shermans meant that a tank destroyed in France could be replaced before the crew was reassigned. It meant that fuel and ammunition supply never determined operational tempo. It meant that tactical defeats, and there were many, never accumulated into operational failure. The crews who died in burning Shermans deserved better machines. But the war they were sent to win required exactly the machine they received. The German laughter died not because the Sherman became fearsome, but because laughter cannot stop inevitability. Technical superiority cannot overcome industrial exhaustion. Excellence, when sufficiently outnumbered, becomes a footnote. The M4 Sherman remains a symbol not of American technical prowess, but of American industrial philosophy. The willingness to build something good enough, build it in overwhelming numbers, and trust that mass and logistics would compensate for individual inadequacy. In the mathematics of total war, 49,000 proved to be the correct answer, even when the question was never supposed to be about quantity.